There was a specific night that changed the way I looked at the world. I remember sitting in front of my computer, doing what I always did, reading headlines, scanning articles, flipping through opinions from media outlets that I thought were independent. But something didn't sit right. The coverage was uniform, sterile, lacking depth and contradiction. It felt rehearsed. That's when I stumbled upon an obscure article discussing a meeting in Madrid, attended by CEOs, political leaders, military generals, and media moguls. It wasn't being covered on any mainstream channel. The name of the meeting, Bilderberg. That name would become an obsession, a portal that opened me to a new, darker understanding of how our world is shaped. This is not just a story of research. It's a story of awakening. And it's not just about them. It's about us, about you, and what we choose to do once we learn the truth. I never wanted to believe it. For years, I trusted the system. I believed in journalism, democracy, global cooperation. But that trust began to erode the more I dug into the shadows behind the institutions we glorify. I started noticing patterns, events that conveniently overlapped, decisions that didn't make sense unless you saw the script behind the play. The first time I heard about Bilderberg, it sounded like another conspiracy theory. But when I discovered how little coverage this meeting of global powerhouses received, despite being attended by prime ministers, intelligence chiefs, military brass, and tech billionaires, I knew I had to ask a deeper question. What are they trying to hide? And if this information is real, why aren't more people talking about it? That was the beginning of everything for me. It was like cracking open a door I was never meant to look behind. The further I looked, the more I realized that reality is curated. The information we consume is filtered through layers of approval, designed to shape our opinions, our emotions, even our fears. It's not just manipulation, it's psychological engineering. Through the news, through social media, through entertainment, they construct a framework of what we are allowed to believe. Think about that for a second. Our perception of truth isn't ours. It's crafted. That means the world we see around us is not a reflection of objective reality, but of a consensus narrative imposed by invisible hands. Once I grasped that, I stopped watching the news the same way. I stopped reading headlines without asking, who benefits from me believing this? I remember the first document I came across, a declassified CIA memorandum outlining the importance of controlling media narratives for national interest. That phrase haunted me. National interest. Whose interest? Because it's not ours. The people, the citizens. We're being programmed, not protected. And the institutions that claim to fight for our well-being are often the very ones pulling the strings. What shook me the most was understanding how they use crises, economic crashes, pandemics, wars, to reshape society while we're distracted or afraid. It's in those moments of fear that we are most vulnerable, most obedient. And that's when the manipulation happens silently, efficiently. Artificial intelligence plays a new role in this system of control. They're not just building smart algorithms, they're building decision makers, machines that learn human behavior, emotions, and tendencies, and then use that data to steer our actions. And we're told it's for convenience, for our own good. But if we're not thinking anymore, if the decisions are made for us, who do we become? That's not innovation. That's domination. The real goal is not intelligence, it's dependency. The elites don't want us to be free thinkers. They want us to be predictable, programmable, and passive. That's not the future. That's a prison. Let me ask you, when was the last time you changed your opinion based on a headline, a fact check, a trending hashtag? You may think your mind is your own, but when the same narrative floods every platform, every screen, every outlet, are you really choosing your beliefs? Or are they being installed? That was the question that broke me. I realized how many of my opinions were simply reflections of the most repeated messages I consumed. I wasn't thinking, I was reacting. And that's exactly where they want us. Because when you stop thinking, you stop resisting. You see, psychological warfare isn't about torture chambers or loudspeakers anymore. It's about noise, distraction, overload. When everything is breaking news, nothing is important. When everyone is outraged, no one is focused. And when everything is entertainment, nothing is questioned. They've learned to weaponize our attention, and the ultimate casualty is truth. That's why I decided to go silent for a while, to disconnect, to think without interference. Because clarity doesn't come from more information. It comes from the space to ask your own questions. And most people have lost that space. They don't even know they've lost it. So if you've made it this far, I want to ask you to do something radical. Question everything. Even me. Don't believe this just because I'm saying it. Research it. Validate it. Ask why you believe what you believe. Because that's where freedom begins. Not in rebellion. In curiosity. In asking the questions no one dares to ask anymore. That's the first crack in the wall. And once you see through it, you can never go back. What they fear most is not revolution. It's realization. And if you're starting to feel something shifting inside of you right now, don't ignore it. That's your mind waking up. Don't silence it. There came a point when I started seeing the patterns behind global crises. Not as coincidences or isolated accidents, but as strategic moments. Engineered events that always seem to benefit the same groups. Every time there's a collapse, someone profits. Every time there's a tragedy, someone expands their control. And we, the people, are constantly the collateral damage. We're told it's for the greater good. But ask yourself, who's good? After 20 years in media, I began to understand how carefully chaos is curated. It's not that they create every event, but they know how to exploit them. They don't waste a crisis. They weaponize it. And that's when it all started making sense. From war, to disease, to economic collapse, it all pointed in one direction: the consolidation of power. The Bilderberg Group was the key that unlocked the door. I attended one of their gatherings in Madrid, not as a guest, but as an observer on the outside. And what I saw shocked me more than anything I'd read. Government officials, tech CEOs, military leaders, banking elites, all arriving in blacked-out cars, guarded by police we paid for, flying in under the radar while the media reported on concerts and football matches. Why such secrecy? Why such protection? The answer is simple: because transparency is the enemy of control. If the public knew what was being discussed, what decisions were being made behind closed doors, the illusion of democracy would collapse. They meet in private so they can shape our public world. And it wasn't just the attendees that unsettled me. It was the absence of journalists. I was the only Spanish journalist outside the venue. Where were the others? Where was the press that claims to speak truth to power? Nowhere. Because they are no longer watchdogs. They are gatekeepers. Some are even participants in these meetings. And that's when I realized journalism, at its highest level, no longer serves the people. It serves the power structures. We have editors shaping narratives based on corporate funding, algorithms suppressing dissent, and headlines written not to inform, but to distract, to stir outrage, to divide, to pacify. And they do it with precision because the data tells them how. It's no accident that while Bilderberg met in Madrid, the entire media machine was focused on Taylor Swift's concert. Bread and circus. That's what they've always used. But now the circus comes in 4K. It's immersive, it's targeted, it's addictive. And while we scroll and dance and comment, they legislate, they broker, they plan. The true architects of our future are not public figures. They are names you've never heard of, making decisions you'll never vote on. And it terrified me how easily it all works. Because the silence isn't accidental, it's strategic. A world this carefully managed doesn't happen by chance. It happens by design. I remember the moment I connected the dots between this machinery and the personal freedoms we're slowly losing. Digital IDs, social credit systems, carbon quotas. Censorship disguised as protection. It's all part of a framework that sells security at the cost of liberty. And most people, out of fear or fatigue, say yes. They trade their voice for comfort, their privacy for convenience. But they don't realize that once you give it up, you never get it back. Control doesn't arrive in chains. It arrives in policies, in laws, in updates, in apps. By the time you notice the cage, the door has been locked from the outside. Artificial intelligence is simply the latest tool in their arsenal. It's not just calculating. It's predictive, behavioral, manipulative. It studies your fears, your habits, your triggers, and then shapes your feed, your choices, your emotions. The goal isn't to help you, it's to guide you, to push you gently down a path of predictable compliance. And when AI is owned by the same conglomerates that own the news, the weapons, the pharmaceuticals, and the banks, what chance do we have unless we resist? Not with violence, but with awareness, with knowledge, with the refusal to be programmed. That's our only shot, our only weapon. And here's the hardest part to admit. We've been complicit, not knowingly, but we've allowed it. Through our silence, through our distractions, through our blind trust in experts who never show us their faces. That's why I started speaking up, not because I have all the answers, but because I know the cost of staying quiet. I've lost colleagues, I've lost platforms. I've been labeled, attacked, censored, but I've also gained clarity, integrity, and a mission. Because if we don't protect our voice, someone else will use it against us. That's not a theory, that's history. I often ask myself what the ultimate goal of this elite network really is. Is it money, influence, legacy? No, it's control. Control over behavior, over perception, over the very concept of truth. They don't just want resources or borders, they want minds. And that's what makes this battle so difficult. Because it's invisible. It's not fought with tanks or missiles. It's fought with narratives, with algorithms, with compliance disguised as virtue. You follow the rules, you're good. You question them, you're dangerous. That's how totalitarianism thrives in a modern world. Not through brute force, but through social programming. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's why they target the family. The family is the last organic structure of resistance. It's where values are passed, where traditions live, where identity begins. If you can fragment the family, you fragment identity. And if you erase identity, you erase resistance. So what do they promote in their culture, in their entertainment, in their education? Isolation, disconnection, hyper-individualism that leads not to strength, but to loneliness. A person with no roots, no bonds, and no legacy is easier to mold, easier to manipulate. That's why parenthood is vilified, gender confused, history rewritten. It's not random. It's the blueprint of psychological warfare. And don't be fooled. They disguise it in the language of progress, inclusivity, equality, climate justice, health. It all sounds noble. That's the brilliance of their strategy. They don't need to suppress you by force if they can convince you that you're being liberated. They get you to willingly participate in your own submission. And those who dare to ask questions, they're labeled as extremists, dangerous, misinformed. The irony is that most of what we're labeled today used to be called journalism, or philosophy, or critical thinking. But now, questioning the narrative is the greatest sin, and silence has become the new virtue. The more I investigated, the more I understood how deeply these systems have been institutionalized. Schools are no longer places of learning, they're places of ideological conditioning. Universities train obedience, not innovation. Newsrooms prioritize clicks over truth. Entertainment serves as soft propaganda. And what do we, the public, get in return? Division, anxiety, and the illusion of freedom. That's why I began urging people to rebuild their minds, brick by brick. You don't need to become paranoid. You need to become aware. You need to develop your own lens, because once you see who benefits, you start to see what's really happening. One of the most chilling realizations I had was about war, how it's manufactured, sold, profited from, and justified by the very institutions that claim to protect peace. We are told to hate nations, groups, ideologies, while the arms dealers remain untouched, growing wealthier with every strike. Ukraine, Gaza, Syria. It's all a stage. And behind the curtain are CEOs, consultants, military strategists who will never bleed, never suffer, never lose a child. And yet they decide who does. They draft the headlines, they shape the timelines, they create the enemies. And if you look closely, it's the same names funding both sides of the war. War isn't just hell, it's business. So what do? We fight, not with guns, with minds, with courage, with refusal. Refusal to be manipulated, refusal to be distracted, refusal to accept comfort over truth. And that starts with conversation, with sharing what you know, with breaking the silence in your own circles, in your family, at your workplace, online, offline. Speak truth even when your voice shakes, especially then, because silence isn't neutral, it's complicity. And if you think your voice is too small to matter, You're exactly who they hope will stay quiet. But you weren't born to be silent. You were born to be sovereign, to be conscious, to be awake. So now it's your move. Are you going to scroll past this and return to your curated feed? Or are you going to dig deeper? Ask the uncomfortable questions, follow the trail, because if you do, you'll see what I saw. You'll feel what I felt. And yes, it will change everything. It might cost you comfort, relationships, reputation, but what you gain is irreplaceable. Your clarity, your voice, your power. The future depends not on politicians or parties or policies. It depends on people like you who decide, once and for all, that they will no longer be lied to, that they will not surrender their mind to algorithms or narratives, that they will take it back. If you've made it this far, it means something inside of you is already stirring. You felt it too. That quiet voice, that tension beneath the surface, telling you that something is wrong with the world we've been handed. That voice is not paranoia. That's discernment. And right now we're in a time when discernment is a revolutionary act. We are surrounded by noise, lies, false lights. And the more this system tightens its grip, the more urgent it becomes for us to rise. Not in anger, but in truth. Not in fear, but in faith. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs clarity. It needs courage. And it needs conviction rooted in something far greater than ourselves. Because ultimately, this isn't just a political battle. It's not just media or ideology. It's spiritual. It's a war between deception and truth, manipulation and freedom, darkness and light. And the only way to see through it all is by anchoring yourself to the source of all truth, Jesus Christ. The system wants you lost, confused, divided, and disconnected. But Jesus restores identity. He gives clarity. He brings peace that no algorithm can replicate, no narrative can twist. When you walk with him, your eyes open, your heart strengthens, your mission becomes clear. That's why they fear him, because in him, you are no longer programmable. If this message resonated with you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Start the conversations others are too afraid to have. The more we speak, the more light we shine in the dark corners they hope we never look into. Subscribe to this channel, not just for content, but to stay connected with others who refuse to sleepwalk through history. Turn on notifications, because every time you show up, you're standing against the silence. And most importantly, follow Jesus. Not religion, not rituals. Follow the truth. He is the way out of this system. He is the light that exposes every lie. And he is the only freedom they can never take from you. Don't just consume content, take action. Read, research, pray, think. Detach from the noise and reconnect with what's real. Build your mind, strengthen your family. Create small communities that still believe in truth, love, and purpose. Teach your children what the world is trying to erase. Teach them that they are not machines, not carbon units, not digital profiles, but souls created in the image of God, and protect that truth at all costs. Because what we allow today will shape the world they inherit tomorrow. The future is not written yet, but we are holding the pen. I don't have all the answers. I never claimed to. I'm just someone who saw behind the curtain and couldn't stay silent. I've lost things for speaking this truth, but I've gained something eternal. A mission, a purpose, and a community of people just like you. People who are awakening, who are searching, who are not satisfied with the shallow answers anymore. And if you're one of them, then you're not alone. You never were. We're building something together. Not a movement, but a mindset, a remnant. And that remnant is rising. So before I go, let me say this from my heart. Thank you. Thank you for giving me your time, your mind, and your trust. I don't take that lightly. I'm here not to lead, but to walk beside you, to fight with you, to pray with you, and to remind you that in a world full of noise, your voice still matters, your soul still matters, and the truth still matters. Don't give up, don't give in, and don't forget who you are. You were made for more than this system. You were made for freedom, for purpose, for eternity. Subscribe to the channel and follow Jesus. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, stay awake, stay bold, and never stop seeking the truth.